day on it. Hello, this is assignment 11, Metamorphosis Project. We are going to use our photography, as in this composite example of the butterflies, to show a change over time through sequential images. I did a little test at the end of last class with you. I just call it an expressions test, where I took 5 exposures of my face, right? Obviously happening at different times. And then I was able to layer them all up in Photoshop as different layers. And then using the timeline function, which allows you to selectively kind of animate the eyeball here on your layers, I was able to play through them. So you can get a sense of how my face was changing over time. Okay, the problem with this for the project is my face is moving, but it's not changing dramatically from beginning to end. So there's not really a transformation. Instead, there's just a movement test. So now I want to sketch something. And I want to think, what can I capture photographically that I'm interested in for my portfolio that changes over time? So I'll call this Carl Assignment 11 Sketch Storyboard. And before most narrative time-based artworks are filmed or captured by a camera, they are storyboarded. And a good storyboard artist makes about $1,000 an hour in Hollywood. And they sit down with the director, and the director describes the kind of motions they want to communicate in a movie, right? Which is just a sequential use of photography. And then the storyboard artist will take what that director says, and they get paid so much per hour because they work very quickly. And they sketch some boxes. If it's a widescreen movie, they sketch wide screen boxes. We're going to sketch squares, and our storyboard is going to be simply 3 squares on 3 squares, so 9 total steps to showcase our transformation. So in your sketchbook, I want you to show just how you've thought about what you want to capture and what kind of transformation you want to see. So my idea for this semester is to capture a collaborative art project that art club did. And so we set up, the idea was to set up a tripod and then to add to that tripod stuff. And we called it the Magpie Mask Project. And then we added more stuff and more stuff. And more stuff. And so it's additive. The transformation is that more and more stuff is getting added on. So more and more and more each time. So that you really feel by the end that there has been a huge change from beginning to end. Now, I didn't know how long this project would take. It was going to have a lot of hands involved, a lot of different input. And so all I could do was control the event as much as possible, as in this storyboard. Because what I wanted to have happen, let's see, was to have everything the same in each exposure except for the object that was changing. So I didn't want any changes in the background. I didn't want any changes in the lighting, in the focus, in the composition, in the angle. All the formal elements would stay the same so that we really can focus on what is being added to each frame. So this was my storyboard. This is the end. This is the beginning, and you want it to be really clear that there is a transformation that happens between, right? So this, we get kind of introduced to what we start to pay attention to. So your first frames, whether it's 50 frames or just 3 frames, this is our introduction to the action. This tells us what the viewer should pay attention to. In the middle, we see the build-up. If you're thinking of it like a story in a movie, a cinematic story, this is where all of the different elements are added to build up to the climax. So the build up to completion. And that might take, 50 different exposures that you document, but you want to boil it down to about 3, showing the middle of the process. And then with the end, you want to show the consequence. Okay. Now, I could do this exact same idea. Let me show you what I mean. But simply have this in every frame. And instead of the foreground object changing, I could just have the background change. But it's the same idea exactly. So what if the wallpaper behind this stick changed for each one? Right. That'd be a metamorphosis of the background. Maybe it would slowly add plants or something in the background. So it might start this way, and then you might get 1 plant, and then you might get 2 plants, and then you might get 3 plants coming up around it, filling up the background. And so that by the end, it's like a jungle behind it. So both of these set up photographic problems, right? Whether we're looking at this or with plants. And the problem is, how do you shoot this to always be the same when you don't know what you're going to end up with? And so the keys to this project and getting good exposures are to use a tripod. So here are my tips. Number 1, use a tripod. That stabilizes your composition, stabilizes how far zoomed in you are. Step 2, manual focus if possible, or know exactly what you're always going to focus lock on for every every shot. Right? Step 3, control your lighting as much as possible. So if you can use manual settings for your full exposure, and you never change the lighting for each exposure, well then each exposure will match perfectly. That's not always easy. And step 4, you begin with your first exposure with the end in mind. So for instance, this is the end of the exposure I want. And the reason we're cropping down to a square is I had no idea how big this project would get. So I had to take shots of this project that were basically way bigger than the actual frame I wanted. So my exposures were like this big around it because I didn't know how long it or how tall it would get, and I knew I wanted to be able to crop down to a square. All right, so that's my sketch. That shows my intention. I think of it. I try to standardize the lighting. I set my camera for manual focus. I use a tripod. I try to control my exposures as much as possible with my settings. And I begin with the end in mind, which means I don't zoom in too closely too soon. Because I don't need super high-res images for this, because they're only going to print a few inches by a few inches in full resolution. Okay, so I'm going to save that just as a JPEG. And that's the first thing I would submit for this project. My sketch. Thinking of that, I then get my exposures. So that's the next thing. It was easy for me to get exposures of my face. I'm a willing model, but to get these exposures of this collaborative art project took a little bit more discipline. Right? Finding a good place with pretty standardized lighting, and then figuring out how much to shoot. Even though my final print is only going to be 9 frames, I want to document every change I can, because I can't control it all. If I were to do this again, and if it was just my project and not an art club project, I might start by having them build the thing. And this is what we called our magpie mask. It was just done out of found objects around the art building. We're tying it into America Recycles Day. So we could have just started with the end, and then I just could have taken stuff away for each frame and decided how much should be removed. And then I might need a lot fewer. But the whole thing is we wanted to keep this. So I had to document it while we were building it, right? So I opened them up in preview. You'll notice my first few shots are all just of the tripod. And that's to try to get it centered and vertical. So that's my first kind of standard shot. And then from there, each shot adds something. And they're all kind of dark. And you can see how standardized the lighting is. But the problem was this was not a closed sound studio. This had windows. And it was a stormy day, which was great. And so we had nice diffused light. But you'll see when the sun kind of broke out a little bit, and that changed the exposures, and then it got a little bit more versatile. So you see there, just that change. Just the change in lighting there. And then on and on and on. So I have lots of exposures. Now what do I do with these? Well, I put them all into a folder. I go to that folder. I have it nicely organized. And I'm going to load all of these, there's the folder, into Photoshop. And the way I do that is I open up Photoshop and I say scripts load files into stack. Now before I do that, I want to make sure I want all these exposures. So this is where you can kind of clean them out and just delete the ones you don't need.